Good morning. It's a rainy day, but it's a warm day. We'll take it, right? I'll take that anytime over the snow that we've had in the last little while. Today, I want to focus on the lower back. You know, with everybody out there now in their gardens, and we've gone from shoveling to maybe we're still shoveling, raking, yes, and lifting and moving and crawling around. So I thought, let's do some preventative stuff, like work on the core a little bit and work on just releasing some of the muscles that might have tension in them. So I'd like you to get a chair. We've been rolling on our tennis ball. So if you're watching the recording, feel free to pause right here and either roll on a tennis ball or a dowel or a can or a rolling pin or something, just to kind of start the process of releasing through the back line of the body. And if you've done it already, you're great, you're ready to go. If you haven't done it, it's okay too. You'll still get the benefits. So you'll probably need a blanket or two, the usual stuff, blocks. Move my dowel out of the way. You can buy dowel. This is, I don't know, like 1.25 inches, something like that. And it's a third of what you buy. And this is about, the whole thing is about $6, I think. And it's a pretty inexpensive prop to buy compared to some of the props you can buy. So I'm going to put a blanket on this chair because I need the little bit of softness. I rearranged, not rearranged, but I had to take the room apart and then put it back together. And it feels like a little bit like something's not where it's supposed to be. Does it feel like it's off a little bit? No? Okay. Is it wider? Okay. So then you can take your second blanket, just so you have a little extra padding, and put it right here close to the chair, if you have 2 blankets. Then when you come to get into the pose, sit. So I'm sitting, so I've got my side, doesn't matter which one. So I want to kind of get close so that when I come up here, I've got as much support for the calves as I possibly can. You know, it's okay if your feet hang off the edge. And then come back down. And then I'll see if you're not close enough, I can bring it so that the back of your knees are pretty close to being supported if they're not supported. Depending on the length of your thigh bones too, you may need more height on your chair, or you might need more height under you. So we'll start with this feeling of support through the back of the lower legs. So we went feet, now lower legs. And I'll talk you through what's coming up next. So adjust if you need to. Adjust your blanket that's underneath you if you need to. I'm just thinking it might be nice to have a little bit of a blanket support right under my low back for the shape of the curve that you have. That's actually kind of nice. So I've just tucked this under here a little bit. Then I'd like you to press your calves into the chair as if you wanted to lift your pelvis off the floor, but don't actually lift it. Just see how when you press your calves into the chair, you get a little bit lighter in the back of the pelvis. Is that true? So find that place. And it's almost as if your pelvis is just barely touching the ground. And then with a little bit of suspension like this, I'd like you to rock your pelvis forward and back. So now that I've put this support under my low back, I have something I can feel as I tip my pelvis backwards. And I'm kind of using my hands to show the direction. So if you need to see pelvis back, forward. And when I go back, I can feel a little bit more like I'm connecting with that support that I just put under my lumbar. And then forward, I feel like I'm arching my back maybe a little bit further away from that support. You don't have to have that support there. If the support's not there, then you might feel like you're lengthening your low back. So we're engaging through the back of the body, through the legs, and allowing the pelvis to have a little bit of a floaty experience. And notice how, when you move your pelvis, it affects your low back. Then see if you can find a balanced place between those two ranges of motion. So between the pelvis tipped forward, the pelvis tipped back, where does it feel more neutral to you? So the back of your pelvis is more or less parallel to the floor. And then slowly let it descend. Lower it down to land in that same shape. So you let go of the effort gradually. Hamstrings and calf muscles let go. And you allow your pelvis to settle right here. It continues to get heavier and heavier for me. I like that. So I'm not sinking into my low back. I'm sinking into my pelvis in that shape, that alignment. And then once I'm there, once we're there, let's let it rest. Let things rest for a moment or two. This is such a great pose to go into if you're having any acute lower back pain. If you've been working in the garden all day, this is a really great pose to come into because the feet are elevated. The heart doesn't have to work so hard to bring the blood back. You're in a position where your spine doesn't have a downward force. And the other bonus is that we've got femurs or thigh bones on this vertical line, almost vertical. And gravity can invite the tops of the femurs to sink into the hip sockets. Because very often when we sit a lot or walk, because of the way we sit, we walk with the thigh bones a little less than centered, maybe more forward in the hip socket, which can restrict range of motion. So this gives us a chance for the thigh bones, the heads of the femurs, to do some sinking, centering. And hip flexors through the front of the hips are quiet and soft. So your arms can be out to the sides or they can be on your abdomen. And if you're okay to close your eyes, you can close your eyes, or you can look at something softly through almost a half-closed eye. And I'll also invite you to turn to an awareness of your breath. And as always, if that feels like it's anxiety producing to pay attention to your breath, you can let it go at any time. I know I would say try it every once in a while and see. And as you're breathing and paying attention to your breathing, if that's a challenge for you, remind yourself that you're safe and you're okay. And having said that, if you don't feel safe, you don't feel okay, then don't pay attention to the breath. I just really want you to notice how you're breathing, where there's movement in your body, texture of the breath, length of the breath, both in or out. And this is a pose that we can lie in for probably up to 20 minutes. probably one of the best places you could be if you have any back issues going on. Neutral pelvis, neutral spine, femurs into the hip sockets. Breath free, front body free to breathe. Just another 30 seconds or so here. Not just an injury in your low back, but fatigue, overuse. Great pose to come into. So with an awareness of where your pelvis is in space and how it's resting, slowly start to shift your weight in your legs as if you want to lift your left leg off the chair. So start to feel the right leg becoming a little bit more active to support and stabilize. Maybe even notice anything in your abdomen as you begin to transition to lift your left leg off the seat of the chair. Just let it kind of hover above the chair and notice, did you tip your pelvis more to the left side? And can you bring it back? So that's a very subtle place where we're engaging the core muscles here, as well as perhaps obliques to help bring the pelvis back to center. Back of the leg is also engaging on the right. And then continue to bring your left leg towards you. You can reach your hands around to the back of your thigh or around your shin. And notice as your leg came closer to you, did your low back start to move into the floor? Did your pelvis do a backward tip? And if it did, come back and do the whole process again. Inviting your pelvis to stay where it is. Not to say that we won't let it move, we will. But I could have the awareness of if it moved. Did you know if it moved? So say take a few breaths here. If your arms aren't quite long enough to reach your shin or the back of your leg without lifting your head or shoulders off the ground, you can always take your strap and put it around the back of your leg. So now, instead of holding your pelvis where it is, allow your low back to sink in and maybe allow your leg to come in a little bit closer. So this tipping of the pelvis is happening a little bit more on the left side than the right. Can you feel that? You've got two halves of the pelvis. The right side for stability is kind of tipping forward a little bit, and the left side's kind of tipping back a little bit. This incredible set of bones can do that. Because we have maybe the pelvis elevated slightly, maybe gravity helps you a little bit with this. So releasing from the low back to the back of the pelvis, through the thigh, the back of the thigh, the top of the hamstrings. And where your hands are, let your arms be heavy. So you can kind of hold on to your hands with your leg. So it's kind of like a clamp. And let your elbows drop, let your arms be heavy. Or if you're around your shin, let the weight of your arms hold your leg there. I promise to get you moving. I want you to see the contrast too of what this is more patient work. Patience to lie still and be with the experience and see what it's offering you. Okay, then let go of your leg. Bring your leg back so your thigh is almost vertical, maybe slightly, your knee slightly in front. And then just start to take your leg out to the side and towards the middle. So with a bent leg, I'm moving it this way. I'm also wanting to keep my pelvis in that neutral position. I'm exploring my range of motion. I'm also, because I want my pelvis to stay in this neutral position, I need to stabilize it. So I'm going to use my core muscles to do that. So you don't even need to know what muscles. You just need to know, how do I do that? How do I stop my pelvis from tipping over to the left? Please keep breathing. Okay, one more time. We're doing this movement as we've got the thigh bone weighted. So then come back into center. And if you can watch what happens with my knee and my foot, I'm turning this way now and turning this way. So it's different than out to the side. It's a rotation and a rotation. Might not be as big a movement. Everybody with me still? If your knee is slightly in front of your hip joint, your hip flexors can soften a little bit here so that they're not going to be engaged and active to hold your leg in place. Okay, last one. Then make your way to putting your ankle, your left ankle, on your right thigh. And if that's too much and you can't keep your pelvis in that neutral place anymore, then slide your ankle down your shin a little bit like this. So now that we're here, we're going to do that same action of rotation. Think of now moving from your ankle joint. And notice what happens when you turn your leg in. Do you also shorten the left side of the body, or can you keep that long? Okay, I'm going to switch legs. Don't you switch legs. I'm just going to show you so you can see where we're going next. So then you're going to take your legs in this formation and start to rotate. So a little bit of engagement through your core to stabilize, to lift your leg off your right leg off the chair and to rotate. So now what I don't want to do is arch my back to hold myself into this shape. I want to find support from the front and the back to balance and then rotate. And when I rotate, I'm bringing my right or left foot right down to the ground. That makes sense. Am I saying it correctly? Then take your left hand behind your head. You can bring your right hand on your knee. And it doesn't matter if this leg folds in. It's more or less opening through the front of this hip. Left hand's behind your head. And you can roll back onto your hand. So we have the body in a bit of a rotation. Let's see, how does that look? Feel free to adjust your legs. So Bev, your legs are going to come right off the chair. Both legs, yeah. Yeah. So it's like this. Yeah, you got it. I'm like this or like this, either one, but I'm here in this rotation. Be in a version that feels okay. And what I mean by that is it's not too intense. It's just right, and you can breathe. Breathing's important, particularly when you're feeling fatigue in muscles. Because when you breathe, when you breathe and move, you send prana, life force energy through your body. You send that energy through. Okay, we'll just take another couple breaths here. If it feels too intense, you can back off. Find a version that works. Then you can take your right hand off your leg. Take your hand out from underneath your head, roll back to the center, and bring your legs back up on the chair. And then we'll take a few moments here in the center again to let things settle. Feel what you feel. We can do so much healing for ourselves if we have patience and allow time. There are no quick fixes. Something can be injured pretty quickly, but unfortunately, healing takes longer. There's so many layers to healing. The nervous system is a big part of that. So now let's go to the other side. So we have weight in the left leg this time to support the lifting of the right calf off the chair, keeping the pelvis from dropping to the right. So great awareness to say, yeah, I am engaging in my abdomen. Then keeping the pelvis neutral, take your right leg, your bent leg, out to the side and back to the center. You can go across the midline too. But as I'm doing this, I want to keep my pelvis level. You can use your arms out to the sides, or you can go arms free. See where does it get harder? The further my leg goes out to the side, the more I have to work to keep my pelvis in the center. Oh, I skipped the resting part. Hang on. I'll come back to it. Oh, it's all good. Then come back into the center and we'll hold on to the leg. You just added a little extra movement in there. So you're holding on either behind your thigh or around your shin. So we're resisting at first, keeping the pelvis level. And noticing the challenge with that, or not challenge. And it's like, yeah, I could do this all day long. And then start to bring your right leg maybe a little bit closer. Allow your pelvis on that side to tip backwards. So you can bring your hands around your shin. Or behind your knee. Arms become heavy though. And feel the difference from one side of the pelvis to the other. Because a lot of the times, if there's something going on in your low back, it could be coming from what's happening at the SI joints, where the pelvic, the two sides of the pelvis fit in with the sacrum, which is the bone in the center, part of the spine. The sacred bone. So notice if there's any pain. If there's pain here, don't stay here. Notice if your right hip is lifting up towards your right armpit, shortening that side of the body. Bring more length back to it. And then we'll release, bring the knee so it's just a little bit in front of the hip. And we'll do that rotation now. Notice if you're trying to do the rotation by turning your foot around and it comes from the hip. So it's just a turn. So if there was a handle on the top of your knee and it's rotating. Yeah, looks good. We're doing stuff, but we're still working with the spine in this neutral position and the pelvis in a neutral position. Very healing. Bring it back into a place where there's not that downward force. You could lie here still for a long time, or you could do what we're doing, do a little movement with it too. And then replace your ankle on your other leg. So either on your thigh, just in front of your knee, or back further if you need to. And then, like we did on the first side, the left leg needs to come off the ground. So how are we going to do that? I can arch my back to support that movement, or I can take a breath in, exhale, and find that subtle engagement through my core again, which is really, think of narrowing the front of your pelvis. And then start to rotate your legs off the chair. Right foot comes to the floor, either stays up like this or drops down. And you can bring your right hand behind your head and let the right side of your body move away from the left. That's a good time for me to peek at you. Yeah, so you've got a rotation in your spine. And if that feels like it's been about the same amount of time, instead of coming back onto our backs, we're going to take a break from being there. Continue to roll onto the side of your body. You can rearrange your legs until you can bring your hands down and lift yourself up. And we'll move into a table pose. So you can move the chair out of the way. We may come back to it. And I'm going to suggest that you have your extra blanket because we are going to go into child's pose. And I'm also going to suggest that you take your blanket and fold it in half. Unless you absolutely know you have no issues at all. Sometimes I like the idea of all of us doing the same thing. So here is my blanket. My shins go on there from my knees to my ankles and my feet hang off. Then I can be in table pose. Then I have a little bit less concern about what happens at my ankles when I go into child's pose. So in table pose, always check in with your hands to see how you're placing them. So long wrists on both sides, long wrists and fingerprints holding. So I said on the weekend, imagine I'm throwing you a giant stability ball. How would you catch it? What would your hands look like to catch that ball? And that's how I want you to hold on to this big ball called the earth. And then once you have that, allow your spine to sink into your body. So you think about your spine sinking in from your pelvis up to your cervical spine. So hanging your neck or hanging your head is the opposite of letting your spine sink. So we want to keep the head lifted and even let the cervical spine or the cervical spine, the neck sink in. Let everything sink for a moment. And then press into your hands and lift every part of the spine, opening it. So then your head can lift. So it's just a different way to approach a cat and cow. Think of opening the spaces between the joints at the back of the body. And then come back and allow that sinking. So we're closing up the space of the joints at the back of the body. And go back and forth between the two. So it's not just between your shoulder blades. Think of your whole spine being affected. And if you feel like it's too much in your hands, just notice where hands foundation needs to be active too. You're feeling it more in the outer wrist, which is pretty typical. And put more weight and action into your index finger and thumb. We'll take 2 more after this one. And then as you come back through neutral, look slightly forward in front of your hand. So maybe about 8 inches, 10 inches forward. As your eyes go forward, send your sit bones backwards. So we're deepening the hip creases as we take the sit bones back. It's almost like you're aiming your sit bones back and up. If you find the further you go back, the more your knees say nope, or the more your hips say no, then you can either put a support here or here, I mean a blanket, or both. So as you go back, just kind of test the waters and see how far, and then come back up again. I'm going to move through this. So notice too, when you go back, so we're sending sit bones back, keeping the front of the body long, keeping it long from the hip creases to the collarbones. How far back you go is really up to your body. And then we come back up. So we shift weight in the hands. So when you come forward, there's more weight, downward pressure through your hands. And then as you go back, it starts to get a little bit lighter. You still keep pressing into the ground, holding the earth with your fingerprints. And if you can, hold your first knuckle down, your index finger knuckle down. It's going to be the one that's going to resist the most. Well, we're doing this really movement that's not not as weight bearing as a downward dog. It's good practice for what we need to feel. I've got my toes tucked, but they don't have to be tucked. So we're going to do one more and then we're going to stay in child's pose for a few breaths. Please serve yourself in child's pose. I'm going to take my feet now, point them back down and sit back and then bring my hands where, a little further forward, bring my hands where I can support me. Maybe fists, maybe elbows and hands like this. Maybe you bring a block in and you put a block under your forehead. So please don't be in this pose or don't be in a version of this pose that causes you pain. If you're waiting for me to tell you it's time to come out, then that's not the place for you to be. If you can be in the pose and go, oh, I can notice all my sensations, all the things that are squeezing, all the things that are expanding. Can I direct my breath to move into the back of my body, into the rib cage? Maybe if my low back was feeling a little bit tight and fatigued, does it feel longer here? Does it have a little bit of subtle movement when I breathe? And if I were to say to you, we're going to stay in this pose for 10 minutes, what would you have to change? It's not going to be 10 minutes. It's just to get you to think, I couldn't sustain this for 10 minutes. Two breaths more here. And then lift yourself up. Come forward, come onto your hands and knees again. Let's move the blanket out of the way because we're going to lower down at some point. You may even want your blocks in front or nearby so that we can go into a lunge position. I'm going to say left leg forward. So however you want to get it forward. Knee, you can have a blanket under your knee, but we're going to tuck the back toes so we're not going to stay here too long. And then lift your back knee off the floor. So we've got support on 2 feet and 2 hands on the blocks. Maybe you have a little bit of support, your body rests on your thigh. Is it possible to lessen the support you have of your body on your thigh? Not rely on that so much. And maybe lessen the support you have on your hands. How are we going to do that? We want to balance between the front and the back leg. If I shift a little bit more of my weight into the back leg, this is a low lunge, so it's not a huge opening for the front of the hip. So we're not there yet. We'll take another couple of breaths like this. Again, this side of the pelvis is doing this, and this side of the pelvis is doing this. So we've got a backward rotation and a slight forward rotation on this side. So if it's really starting to feel like that's a lot in my hands, just kind of play with where your weight is so that your hands are you're not so dependent on them. They're part of your foundation, but they don't have to take all the weight. Okay, slowly bring your knee down. We're going to change sides. I told you we'd move. I didn't say we'd move very fast, though. Same thing. So when I lift my back knee off the ground, I want to be pretty long in my pose. So if I was here and I lift my back knee off the ground, see how my body is not really able to lengthen. But if I move it further back, because we've got the body on an angle, we're not really asking too much yet for the hip flexors on the left side. And then we want to play again. Like I don't want to feel all the weight in my hands. I want to be able to Say that's part of the foundation, not the most important part. I'm going to play a little bit and see that same engagement we had through the abdomen before to move the leg off the chair, I'll hover it above the chair. So can I find that same sense of narrowing through the front of my pelvis? In the same sense in child's pose of the front body being really long. And notice if you're waiting for me to tell you it's time to come out of the pose. If you need to come out of the pose, come out of the pose. But how can you rearrange your body parts and engage so that you can make this sustainable? That's really, we want to sustain these food bodies. The physical body is known as the food body in yoga philosophy, because it's what you eat, you become. So we want to be able to sustain them for a long time. Okay, bring your back knee down. Move the blocks out of the way. Time to come down on your belly. Come all the way down, however you want to get there. I'm getting you off of your hands. Not to say that we won't be doing plank at some point, we will. So note that I'm trying to be kind to your wrists. So lay down, you can have your hands underneath your forehead. I like to do this. And just feel your body on the ground. With your abdomen laying on the ground, it's not able to move as easily as when you were the other way around. And the abdomen moves because the diaphragm, which is part of the core, it moves from the rib cage towards the pelvis. And it can only move so far, and then it presses on your organs and your organs expand. So if it can't do that here, the front of the body, there's going to possibly be some more movement at the back of the body. So as you breathe in, can you allow your back ribs to spread? Back lower ribs to spread, and that's the diaphragm's job. But sometimes you have to make it happen. You have to say, hey, do it. So as you're getting the back ribs to expand, we realize, well, we can breathe here. It is possible. So I want to add another corresponding action for when you exhale. So as you inhale, back ribs expand wide. And then as you exhale, narrow the front of your pelvis as if you're trying to make it really narrow. Hip point to hip point, come closer. And then let that go and widen your ribs as you inhale. And then hip points narrow, or front of the pelvis gets narrower. So this is where it's fairly easy to do this. By learning how to breathe into the back of the body and move the back of the body, you will have an effect on your low back. So notice, what do you feel? This is a little, for me, when I inhale and I get my back ribs to widen, I feel a widening through my low back, but also a lengthening. And then we learn how to engage through the core with the exhale by narrowing the front of the pelvis. Okay, last one. Okay, then lift your head off of your hands and rearrange your hands so that they're beside your chest. So if they're too far forward, we're going to get something like this in the shoulder. I want to move it back, and as my hand moves back, my shoulder lifts. Can you see that? So not like this, I'm like this. I'm going to do that on both sides. And keep your head down on the ground, still lift your shoulders. So keep that practice of breathing wide into the back of the ribs. Remember, you can always let go anything that doesn't feel right to you. And take time now to center your legs on the ground. And feel where your toes are. Press the front of your toe knuckles into the ground. So we create an action similar to if you were standing and you were lifting your toes. So now legs have become active just from that action in the toes. I can feel that all the way up to my buttocks. Now, lift your head so it's in line with your spine. Still breathe into the back ribs on inhale, and exhale, narrow the front of the pelvis. Pretend you're in a plank pose. This is helping you to stay stable. Now feel where your hands are on the ground. Keep your legs active. Start to pull your hands back as if you wanted to slide your body forward, but you don't actually let your hands move, and your body kind of moves a little bit, but you're moving forward and lifting up. Still keep that breathing happening. I'm using my hands as leverage to pull back. As I come up, I want to feel long through my spine, particularly in my low back, as opposed to just hinging in one spot. So we'll take a couple more breaths here, widening the back ribs, narrowing the front of the pelvis. And then the next step is to stay here where you are, but lift your hands off the ground. And keep doing the same thing. Adding to the level of difficulty, if you haven't figured that out yet. Still using my toe knuckles, keeping my legs active. Even more important now, keep my legs active. I'm still breathing into the back ribs, widening them and narrowing the front of my pelvis as I exhale. Ready for the next challenge? Find where your legs meet your body. So maybe here, your hip creases, the gluteal fold, and maybe at the front, the hip creases. And lift your legs from there, still pretending you're pressing your toe knuckles into the ground. Widening the back of the ribs on inhale, and narrowing the front of the pelvis on the exhale. Now this is a core practice. Back muscles are working, diaphragm, pelvic floor, and the front transversus abdominis. Let's do 2 more breaths here. And then at the end of the second breath, you can lower your hands and legs to the floor. Maybe even turn your head to one side and rest everything. Notice how your body wants to breathe, where it's challenging. So we're stabilizing the front of the body while we lay on it in order to get some of the back of the body to be more involved in the breath. There's a little bit more lung tissue towards the back of the body than the front. Like I think it's a 40-60 split. 60 at the back, 40 at the front. We're just not used to it though, so we have to practice it. Okay, so bend at your knees. You can bring your hands back to the center and rest your head. Bend at your knees. We'll just do a little rotation, a little massage through the low back. So legs move, which gets the pelvis to move, and then might get a little rotation in your spine. Feel free to even do like a circle. You can peek at me to see how I'm doing that. Change directions as often as you need to, as it feels okay to. And then come back into the center again. Bring your feet down, bring your hands the same place they were. Lift your shoulders away from the floor, keeping the length in the sides of your body from your hips to your armpits. Tuck your toes under. Press into the floor, lift your chest. Stay here. See if you can lift your belly. See if you can lift your pelvis. And then come up. In that order. And then back, we're going to come back into a half downward dog to start. So the spine starts to grow long again. And you can stay fairly lifted here. The idea in downward dog, at least the idea that I'm trying to show you, is to be long through the spine. So we had a bit of a discussion yesterday about, there's no such thing as a flat back. We don't ever want to make the back flat. We want to make it long with all of its wonderful curves. The curves are the lumbar goes inward and the cervical spine goes inward. That's your neck. Upper back rounds outward and pelvis rounds outward. If you feel confident and comfortable and want to go into downward dog, pause here with your toes tucked, maybe shift back forward slightly, re-engage in your hands, remember holding the earth, and then notice the moment just before you lift your knees off the ground. Breathe into the back, sides, and front of the rib cage, so the whole way around. And as you exhale, narrow the front of the pelvis, hover your knees. Can you hold this without gripping or bracing? And then shift into your dog. Or you can stay right where we were. One of the advantages of coming into downward dog is then you can play a little bit, feeling the resistance in the backs of the legs, the calves, and hamstrings. So you can do what we often call pedaling. One heel drops towards the earth, the other leg bends. So you can just say one heel lifts, one heel lowers. One knee bends, one knee moves towards straight. You can linger a little bit longer on one side. You can hold them both down. You can do the contrast of lifting them both up, shortening your calf muscles, bending your knees, and then moving towards straight. Just take another couple of moments. Downward dog is really one of the more challenging poses in yoga, that and sitting poses. And we do it so often in classes without a lot of instruction around it, without taking into consideration that people just don't have the shoulder mobility. Okay, last time, walk your feet up towards your hands. We'll go towards the front of the mat. Get your blocks, bring them into place for forward bend. So I'm going to keep my blocks off my mat. Your forward bend, you might need to go a little wider, and you might need to bend your knees a little bit more to find that same downward dog spine. Then we can go from lengthen the spine to rounding in the spine. And if your legs are bent, it's almost like a standing child's pose. So length into flexion. Not everybody's body is the same. You okay? Mm-hmm. Just need a break? Just maybe a little gas here for a second. Oh. Can happen. Then start to come up. Bend your knees to come up so that you can stay a little bit more centered in your legs. I'm coming up with my feet wide. And then step your feet closer together. It's not like I need your feet to be really close together, just to wherever you feel you have the most balance and the best ability to stay in those 3 points of each foot. Big toe base, so the ball of the foot, baby toe base, and center of the heel. And you could say 4 corners of the feet. I really like the center of the heel. I like thinking of tripods, the feet being tripods. So then look at the relationship you have between your pelvis and your rib cage. Just like we were moving the pelvis like this when we were sitting, we can move the rib cage like this. So it's that combination. Which way is the pelvis tilted? Can you find where neutral is between these? And which way is the rib cage tilted? Can you find neutral between it? So you have, when you line them up, you'll feel this little subtle sense of toning through the core, which is a cylinder. So you'll feel it all the way around, it's not just abdominals. So then when you find that, you'll know, okay, got that. And we're going to maintain that relationship as you bend at your ankles, bend at your knees, and bend at your hips. They don't all bend in the same direction. Sometimes they crack. So what I'm doing is trying to keep my rib cage in the same relationship as my pelvis as I bend those 3 sets of joints, and then come back up. I'm more focused on that because what I'm avoiding is this. And what I'm avoiding, which is probably a little more common, this. So let's go again. We even slightly lean forward. We turn on the muscles along the spine called the multifidus, and they're considered part of the core muscles. You have your hands on the top of the pelvic rim. Meanwhile, we're doing some warming up of your quadriceps. Can you feel that? What time is it? Oh my goodness, this class. We need another hour. I promised you plank. I have to get there. Okay, so we're going to hold Utkatasana or fierce posture. I'm not concerned what you do with your arms, but if you feel you want to take them out, take them up, or take them up, it's your call. What will enhance your pose? What does it do to move your arms in a different position? Did you change the relationship of your rib cage to your pelvis when you moved your arms? And then slowly come back up. If your arms are up, they can come back down. And from here, left foot stays forward. We're going to take the right foot back. And we're going to stay in a little bit more of a balanced position. So the back heel is going to stay lifted, similar to what we were doing when we were on the blocks, but we're doing it from a higher height. So as you lean forward, just notice how your spinal muscles, in combination with your abdomen, start to engage to hold you there. If you're not sure, come back up again. And then see, as you go forward, just remind yourself of breathing wide into the back ribs, exhaling, narrowing the pelvis. And we'll stay here for a moment. Bring your hands to the top of the pelvis. So I've got pelvis and rib cage in the same line, the same awareness of the space around the cylinder. But now I want to use my pelvis to help me come up. So I'm going to follow my hands. This is the action of the pelvis. Pelvis begins, and I want my rib cage to follow me up. So as I come up, I'm engaging the gluteus muscles here, and especially the gluteus maximus on the right. So that's one. We're going to do 2 more. Come forward, breathing and feeling your core engage. because we want to be able to be in positions like this in life. So we're doing it slow to really train the muscles. Then here we go with the pelvis. Both sides. We're shortening here through the glutes to bring you up. And in the process, we're also starting to open up through the front of the right hip. Yes? This one, active. Okay, third time. You really don't need more than that, because it's work. When I go forward, I want to feel balance between both my feet. Even though I have more weight forward, I want to still stay connected to my back foot. And here we go. Pelvis goes. Glutes, gluteus maximus are shortening as you come up. As this engages a little bit more, the front of this hip can open. Then take your arms out and up. Keep the relationship you have between your pelvis and your rib cage as best you can. Keep your shoulders facing forward as best you can. And start to rotate your leg, your pelvis, and your spine, your right leg, until your heel comes to the ground. You may need to step it in a little bit. Shoulders stay forward. So we're doing a rotation, but we're doing the lower body rotating away from the upper body. That's a warrior one. That was a lot of work. Okay, bring your arms down. Turn your back foot again. Lean forward. Breathe back here and narrow the front of the pelvis to shift and stand. My toe came undone here. Okay, notice how you feel. We have a second side. So I don't really need the blocks, but I'm going to shift them over here just in case. Right foot staying forward, step back with your left. How far back? Well, you can play with it. It might go further back. You know what we're doing now. Breathing here in, narrowing here. Front of the pelvis narrowing. And I'm leaning over my front leg, having the relationship between my pelvis, rib cage, and head. So I'm allowing my pelvis to actually tip forward here, but I'm also saying rib cage go with it, head go with it. Okay, here we go, pelvis. Rolls back. So I'm shortening, the movement's happening here. I want to strengthen this part of the body to alleviate some of the work of the low back. Okay, left gluteus muscles active so the front can open. Okay, again, tip your pelvis forward, take your spine with it. Front leg is bending. Back leg is probably straightening. So Brad, lift your chest up a little bit longer. Then pelvis goes. Yeah. If it's challenging, you're doing it right. If it's easy, clarify with me. This is so easy. Maybe you're just that good. Okay, third time, here we go. So the hinge happens here. So the front of the body stays long. Pelvis has turned forward. Now we're trying to get it to go back. So now I'm pulling this down on both sides. Really going to help to strengthen the glutes on the right side. One of the exercises I do every day for my right hip. As I come up a little bit higher, I can feel that, hey, I can engage my left side a little bit more, and that gives me the opening through the front. We can take arms up and turn this into warrior one. Pelvis starts to rotate towards the left. Then your left leg rotates towards the left. Then your right foot and down it comes. Meanwhile, my shoulders have stayed facing forward. So we've got the rotation through the spine. And breathe. This is working. Can you actively contract? Okay. Turn on your back foot. Bring your arms down, start to lean forward. That's what we've been doing. Shift your weight. Engage by drawing your front hip points towards each other, working with your gluteus muscle, maximum in particular, the other ones too, for that matter. You're warm. You can open the windows. No, go ahead. It's still, well, we still have summer weather. I think it's winter again tomorrow. Yeah, the seasons are just changing every day. Okay, so notice how you feel. Let's come into a forward bend to lengthen through the backs. What time do I have? We'll do a plank. We'll come down into a plank. So forward bend first. Feel where the resistance is in your legs. So if you think, I want the fascia from the soles of my feet up through the back of my calves, backs of my thighs, buttocks, back of my pelvis, through my spine, to the back of my neck, back of my head, up to the top of my forehead. I want all that to lengthen. Think of wrapping yourself with a really long, let's say saran wrap. So feel where the resistance is. Where do you need to be in the pose? Do you need to be higher? Do you need to have your knees bent? What works best for you? We'll just be here for another moment. There's so many things we could do for back hair. And then bring your hands to the floor. You can bend your knees and come down onto your knees. Put the blanket under your knees if you need to. Because I said we'd do it. And so often I don't do the things I say I'm going to do. I'm going to stick to it. So I'm holding the earth with my hands. Index finger, thumb pad. I like this idea of rolling my thumbs as if I'm taking a thumbprint. Rolling my index finger as if I'm taking a fingerprint. So both at the same time helps to keep stability in this part of the hand. Take one leg back. Tuck your toes under. Pause. Breathe into the back ribs. Narrow through the front of the pelvis. Take the other leg back while you're narrowing. Breathe into the back of your ribs. Narrow the front of the pelvis. Notice the relationship between your pelvis and your ribs and your shoulder. Take breaks when you need to. Notice where your head is. We want the spine to be neutral. Remember, when your head is dropping, the cervical spine starts to round outward. You want the head to be lifted and have its curve. Press back through your heels for a moment. And as if you wanted to touch a wall in front of you with the top of the head, press forward. If you have to come down before this, come down. If you're okay still here, breathe into the back of your ribs, narrow your pelvis. Yeah, beautiful work, everybody. Then slowly bring your knees to the floor, maintaining all of that really great action. Point your toes back. Press your toe knuckles into the floor. Start to bend at your elbows so your elbows point backwards and you stay long from your pubic bone up to your collarbones. When you get to the point where I can't go any further without changing the shape of my spine, then start to land your pelvis. Let your shoulders come down, but not all the way down. Breathe into the back of your ribs. Keep your legs active. Narrow the front of your hips and lift your hands off the floor. Slowly lower back down. Rest on your forehead. So your forehead on your hands. Let the breath open your low back, lengthen it. It's like a subtle wave. You know, we're not static beings. We don't want to stay in one shape all the time, which is what we do when we sit at our desks in our cars and, you know, all the things that we do for long periods of time. Okay, support yourself so you can roll over. You can either roll over and not worry about which way you're facing, but grab your strap along the way. Do the final. Do I have time? No, I don't have time. You're going into Shavasana. You can do legs up on the chair if you prefer. If you're watching this back, what I was going to do with time, if we had the time, was Supta Panagushtasana. So we don't really have time to do that because I'm already at time for the class. But something like this, both sides is an option for you. If you feel, we did do the forward bend, so it's not like we didn't get the lengthening through the back body, but doing one leg at a time is really beneficial for anything going on with the spine. And typically it would be more on one side than the other. So doing one leg and then together and seeing what that feels like can help you identify where the issues might be. So whatever you happen to be doing now, I'm going to turn off the lights in here and give you about 3 minutes. So whether it's in Shavasana or Supta Padangusthasana or something else. Take some time to unhinge your jaw and notice anywhere within your body that might be holding tension. Become observant about those places is the first step. After that, it's okay, what do I do about that? Hear the sound of my voice. And feel free to stay where you are, whether you're in the studio or whether you're at home. Remember that nothing in nature rushes. Nature does not rush, and yet everything gets done in the time it's meant to get done. Well, if you want to stay longer and get up on your own time, that's fine. You don't have to finish the class. I think sometimes there's this sense of urgency to pop up out of Shavasana and join everybody sitting. Let go of that notion. We're still all together, whether we're sitting or lying down or combination thereof. So listen to what the intelligence of your body, mind, and heart are saying to you, and follow that. I want to say thank you so much for a wonderful session. And it may be see you in the fall. I don't know yet, but I'll let you know at some point if I'm going to be doing anything. Thanks for joining. Peace.